kind-hearted young man, forced by his cruel fiancée to marry a chicken in a public spectacle, was unaware that the city's most powerful CEO was secretly in love with him and about to change his life forever. "You will marry it, or your sister will be out on the street by nightfall." The words, sharp and brittle as shattered glass, echoed in the cavernous, sterile silence of the Vance family's living room. The pounding rain hammered against the ornate bay windows, a relentless drumming that seemed to count down the seconds of Liam's rapidly disintegrating life, each drop a tiny fist of despair against the glass. He stood on the polished marble floor, his worn, threadbare jacket feeling impossibly thin under the cold, unwavering gaze of Amelia Vance, the woman he was supposed to call his fiancée, and her equally cold, statuesque mother, Eleanor. Liam's hands, raw and chapped from a day of manual labor, were clenched into tight fists at his sides, the knuckles white and trembling. He felt the biting cold of the room seep into his bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside and everything to do with the one breaking inside him. He was trapped. Eleanor Vance, a woman whose posture was as impeccable as her crisp, tailored suit, took a slow, deliberate step forward, her heels clicking softly on the marble with an air of finality. Her eyes, the color of chips of ice, raked over Liam's gaunt frame, from his patched boots to the haunted look in his deep brown eyes, and she let out a quiet sigh of theatrical disappointment. "We took you in, Liam. We offered you a chance, a way out of the gutter for you and that fragile little sister of yours. We promised you a life of comfort, a life where you wouldn't have to worry about the next meal or the next medical bill." She paused, letting the weight of her supposed generosity fill the air between them, thick and suffocating. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in a stark, blue-white glare, casting long, menacing shadows that danced like specters. In that brief, brilliant flash, Liam saw the undisguised contempt on Amelia's face. She looked at him not as a person, but as a failed investment, a piece of distasteful charity she was now eager to discard in the most humiliating way imaginable. He was just a means to an end. Amelia stepped up beside her mother, a cruel smirk playing on her perfectly painted lips. "All we asked for in return was loyalty, obedience, and you couldn't even manage that. You were late, again, wasting my father's precious time, looking like a drowned rat, all because you gave away the umbrella he so generously provided." Her voice was a silken lash, each word designed to flay his dignity. "So this is how it ends. We need a public severance. My father's business partners, our friends, they all think we are to be married. We cannot simply have you vanish. It would be untidy." The explanation was delivered with a chilling detachment, as if she were discussing a minor catering issue for one of her lavish parties. The plan they had devised was one of pure, calculated cruelty. A public spectacle, a wedding in the grand ballroom of their estate, where Liam would be joined in mock matrimony not to Amelia, but to a chicken from their country coop, a creature they had named Henrietta for the occasion. It was designed to make him a laughingstock, a pathetic footnote in their glittering social diaries. The poor boy who was so worthless he ended up married to poultry. A final, definitive statement of his place in their world. He was less than human. Liam's chest tightened, a band of unbearable pressure constricting his lungs. He thought of his younger sister, Grace, her pale, sweet face and the racking cough that had kept her confined to their small, damp apartment for months. The Vances had been paying for her expensive medication, dangling her health over his head like a sword. This arrangement, this engagement to the cold and dismissive Amelia, had been his only hope, a devil's bargain he had made to keep his sister alive. He had swallowed his pride, endured the constant belittling remarks, the condescending glances, and the threadbare suits they'd provided him, all for Grace. To see her smile again, to hear her laugh without it turning into a painful gasp for air, was the only thing that mattered. He had clung to that single, pure motivation like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. The memory of her small, trusting hand in his gave him a strength he didn't know he possessed. His own humiliation was a small price to pay for her life. A sob caught in his throat, but he ruthlessly swallowed it down. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. He would not give them his tears. He lifted his chin, his gaze steady and unflinching, meeting Eleanor's icy stare. The silence deepened. "When is the ceremony?" he asked, his voice a low, raw whisper that cracked with unspoken pain but held no trace of defiance. He had made his choice. 2 nights earlier, that same relentless rain had been falling. Liam had just received his meager weekly pay, a collection of crisp notes that felt heavy with the weight of his compromise. He'd spent most of it on a special broth for Grace, leaving just enough for the bus fare home and a single, warm loaf of bread he held protectively under his jacket. He was soaked to the bone, his cheap shoes squelching with every step as he huddled under the flickering light of a bus stop. It was then that he saw her, a woman, sitting alone on the far end of the bench, her shoulders slumped in a posture of profound, shattering grief. She was dressed in simple, dark clothes that were drenched and clinging to her frame, her face pale and streaked with rain that mingled with what looked like silent tears. She seemed utterly lost, a fragile ghost in the stormy night, staring into the middle distance with hollow, haunted eyes. Her vulnerability was a raw, open wound. He watched her for a moment, a fierce, protective instinct rising in his chest. He knew what it was to feel that kind of desperate loneliness, to feel as if the entire world was made of storm clouds and cold pavement. His bus was approaching, its headlights cutting through the heavy fog, a warm, dry sanctuary just moments away. He clutched the small umbrella Amelia's father had sneered at him to take, his only shield against the miserable weather. He hesitated for only a second. His own comfort was a fleeting thing, but the image of the stranger's desolate sorrow felt permanent, a stain on the fabric of the night. He knew what he had to do. He walked over to her, his footsteps quiet. She didn't seem to notice him until he was standing directly in front of her. He held out the umbrella, its worn canopy a small circle of black against the raging sky. "Here," he said, his voice gentle. "You need this more than I do." She looked up, her eyes, a startling shade of amber, widening in surprise. They were filled with a grief so deep it seemed ancient, a story of unbearable loss written in their depths. She looked from his sincere face to the umbrella, then back again, as if she couldn't comprehend the unsolicited act of kindness. A tremor ran through her. I can't," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He simply pushed it gently into her hand. "Please," he insisted, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "Everyone deserves to stay dry," and without another word, without waiting for a thank you, he turned and walked away into the pounding rain, the warm loaf of bread clutched to his chest, his own small act of defiance against the cruelty of the world. He vanished into the storm. Isabella Reyes, CEO of the global powerhouse Reyes Corporation, sat on the cold, wet bench, the cheap plastic handle of the worn umbrella clutched in her trembling hand like a sacred relic. She watched the man's retreating back, his shoulders squared against the deluge, until he was swallowed by the night. A seismic shock went through her, splintering the thick ice that had encased her heart for 5 long, desolate years. It was the anniversary of the day she had lost everything, her husband and her young son, taken from her in a sudden, brutal car crash that had left her the sole, haunted survivor. Since that day, her world had become a sterile landscape of boardrooms, polished marble floors, and cavernous, empty mansions. She had built an empire, her grief a relentless fuel for her ambition. Wealth and power were her armor, a gleaming fortress to keep the raw, gnawing pain at bay. She had become cynical, seeing the world as a purely transactional place where everyone had a price, a motive, an angle. Kindness, especially selfless kindness, was a myth she no longer believed in. Until now. This stranger, this gaunt, weary young man with the steady, gentle eyes, had looked at her and seen not a potential opportunity, but a fellow human being in pain. He had given her his only protection, his only comfort, and had asked for nothing in return. He had no idea he was standing before one of the wealthiest women on the continent. He saw only a soaked, grieving woman on a bench. The act was so pure, so innocent. It was like a beam of golden glow cutting through the heavy fog of her life. A single, forgotten tear, hot and real, traced a path down her cold cheek, mingling with the rain. Her heart, a muscle she thought had atrophied from disuse, gave a painful, powerful thud. It was the feeling of being reawakened. He didn't know it yet, but in that moment of selfless kindness, that quiet, dignified man had just changed everything. She looked down at the umbrella in her hand, then back up at the empty street where he had disappeared. A new, undeniable purpose began to form within the shattered pieces of her soul. She had to find him. She had to know who he was. And she had to repay his kindness, not with the cold currency of her wealth, but with the profound gratitude of a heart he had just, miraculously, started to heal. She wouldn't just thank him. She would save him. The next morning, the search began. Isabella Reyes, back in her commanding persona, strode into her sleek, top-floor office. The city spread out below her like a map. The cheap, worn umbrella sat on the edge of her massive, polished mahogany desk, a stark and beautiful contrast to the room's opulent minimalism. It was a symbol, promise. Her head of security, a former intelligence officer named Marcus, stood waiting, his expression impassive. "I need you to find someone," Isabella said, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel he had not heard since she'd taken over the company. She described the man. His haunted but kind eyes, his threadbare jacket, the bus stop, the time. "Use everything we have. Facial recognition from street cameras, transit card data, anything. I want his name. I want to know everything about him." Marcus simply nodded. "Consider it done, Ms. Reyes." For the next 48 hours, the formidable resources of the Reyes Corporation were mobilized for a single, deeply personal mission. While algorithms sifted through terabytes of data and private investigators discreetly canvassed the neighborhood, Isabella felt a strange, unfamiliar mix of anxiety and hope. The memory of the stranger's gentle gesture had become a constant, warm presence in her thoughts, a stark counterpoint to the sterile silence of her life. The file landed on her desk with a soft thud. "Liam Ashton," Marcus announced, 24 years old, an orphan, works as a day laborer at the construction site downtown. His only living relative is a younger sister, Grace Ashton, aged 16. She suffers from a severe, chronic respiratory illness. Isabella's heart clenched. She read on, her expression hardening with every line. The report detailed Liam's desperate financial situation, the crushing medical debt, and finally, the cruel arrangement with the Vance family. The pending engagement to Amelia Vance, daughter of Charles Vance, CEO of Vance Industries, a man who had been desperately trying to secure a partnership with Reyes Corp for months. And then the final grotesque detail, gleaned from a loose-lipped servant in the Vance household. The public humiliation, the wedding, to a chicken. A wave of cold fury washed over Isabella, so intense it made her gasp. The Vances were not just cruel. They were monstrous. They were taking this pure, selfless man and trying to shatter his spirit for their own amusement. The biting cold of her anger was quickly replaced by a white-hot, protective resolve. They had picked the wrong person to torment. They had no idea who was now watching, whose path they had so foolishly crossed. She looked at the picture of Liam in the file, a candid shot of him leaving the hospital after visiting his sister. Even in the grainy photo, his quiet dignity was evident, the weary set of his shoulders and the profound sadness in his eyes. He was the embodiment of the virtuous sufferer. Her first instinct was to storm the Vance mansion, to bring their world crashing down around them. But that was too simple, too clean. They deserved a punishment that mirrored their crime. Public humiliation. They wanted a spectacle. She would give them one they would never forget. Her plan began to take shape, intricate and absolute. First, she made a quiet, anonymous donation to the hospital that covered all of Grace Ashton's past and future medical expenses, enough for the best specialists and treatments in the country. It was a secret intervention, a safety net Liam didn't even know was now securely in place beneath him. His greatest fear, the one that made him bow to the Vances cruelty, was now gone. He was already free, he just didn't know it yet. Next, she picked up the phone and placed a call to Charles Vance's secretary. "Tell him Isabella Reyes has reviewed his proposal," she said. her voice smooth as polished steel. "And I will be attending his daughter's wedding on Saturday to discuss the final details of our merger in person." The trap was set. The stage was ready. The hidden savior was about to make her entrance. The day of the ceremony arrived wrapped in a heavy fog that clung to the city, muffling sound and sight, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Liam stood in a small antechamber off the main ballroom, dressed in a ridiculously ill-fitting tuxedo the Vances had provided. It was a mockery in itself, the sleeves too short, the fabric cheap and scratchy. He stared at his own reflection in an ornate, gilt-edged mirror, but the man looking back was a stranger, his face a pale, gaunt mask, his eyes hollowed out by despair. He felt a profound sense of detachment, as if he were watching a tragic play unfold from a great distance. He thought of Grace, safe for now, and that thought was the only thing that kept him standing. He had received a call from the hospital that morning, a bewildered administrator telling him an anonymous benefactor had settled all of Grace's accounts. It was a miracle, a baffling, unbelievable act of grace that had left him trembling with relief and confusion. For a moment he'd thought he could back out, that he was free. But a sharp, menacing call from Eleanor Vance, reminding him that they knew where he and his sister lived, had extinguished that flicker of hope. They would still ruin them out of sheer spite. The humiliation had to be completed. There was no escape. A soft click of the door brought him back to the present. Amelia swept in, a vision in a shimmering, silver gown, her face a perfect portrait of smug triumph. She circled him like a predator, her eyes glittering with malice. "Ready for your big day, darling?" she cooed, the endearment dripping with sarcasm. "Henrietta is waiting. The guests are simply dying to see the main event." He remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. His quiet dignity infuriated her more than any outburst could have. She wanted him to beg, to cry, to scream. His unwavering composure was a denial of her power. Her face hardened. "Remember what this is about, Liam. It's about putting you in your place. It's a lesson in knowing what you are. And what you are is nothing." She leaned in close, her perfume cloying and sweet. "Smile for the cameras," she hissed. "It's going to be a day to remember." Then she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and the echoing sound of her quiet chuckle. He closed his eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and pushed the doors open to walk toward his destiny. He was ready to face the laughter. He was ready for the pain. The grand ballroom of the Vance estate was a scene of grotesque festivity. A small, hay-strewn platform had been erected at the far end, complete with a miniature altar. Hundreds of guests, the city's elite, were dressed in their finest, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and cruel amusement. Champagne flowed, and the air buzzed with whispered jokes and condescending laughter. Charles and Eleanor Vance stood near the entrance, greeting their guests with practiced smiles, basking in the glow of their own sadism. At the center of the platform, in a small, decorated cage, was Henrietta the chicken, clucking placidly, utterly unaware of her role in the bizarre spectacle. As Liam walked the long aisle toward the stage, a hush fell over the crowd, quickly followed by a wave of snickers and poorly concealed guffaws. Flashbulbs from society photographers popped, capturing his slow, dignified march into public disgrace. He kept his eyes forward, his expression a mask of calm resolve. He would not let them see him splinter. He reached the platform and stood beside the cage, his back straight, his spirit battered but not yet broken. An actor hired for the occasion, dressed as a caricature of a priest, opened a book and began to speak in a booming, mocking tone. The humiliation was absolute. It was unbearable. Just as the actor reached the farcical climax, asking if anyone had cause why this man and this chicken should not be joined in holy matrimony, the grand double doors of the ballroom swung open with a resounding thud that echoed through the suddenly silent room. Every head turned. There, framed in the doorway, stood Isabella Reyes. She was no longer the soaked, grieving woman from the bus stop. She was a vision of commanding power, dressed in an impeccable, tailored suit of deep crimson that stood out like a flame against the room's pastel decor. Her amber eyes, no longer haunted, were sharp and focused, sweeping across the room with an authority that left no doubt as to who was in charge. Beside her stood her head of security, Marcus, a formidable and silent presence. A collective gasp went through the crowd as they recognized the legendary, reclusive CEO of Reyes Corporation. Charles Vance's jaw dropped, his face paling. He and Eleanor rushed forward, their expressions shifting from smugness to utter panic. "Ms. Reyes," Charles stammered, his voice cracking. "What an honor. We weren't expecting you so soon." Isabella ignored him completely. Her gaze was fixed on one person and one person only, Liam. He froze. He stared at her, his mind reeling in disbelief. It was her, the woman from the storm. But it was impossible. Isabella began to walk slowly and deliberately down the aisle, her heels clicking with a steady, rhythmic cadence on the marble floor. The crowd parted before her as if by an invisible force. The air crackled with tension. She walked directly to the stage, her unwavering gaze locked with Liam's. A silent, unspoken message passed between them, one of recognition, of disbelief, of a promise about to be fulfilled. She stopped just before the platform, turning to face the stunned and silent audience. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the cavernous room, clear and resonant with cold, controlled fury. "I was invited here today to witness a wedding," she began, her eyes sweeping over the Vances, who visibly winced. "I was told it was a celebration of love. Instead, I find a celebration of cruelty, a grotesque display of inhumanity designed to break the spirit of a good and honorable man." She turned her head slightly, her gaze falling upon Charles Vance. He looked as if he'd been struck. "You, Mr. Vance, have been courting my company for 6 months. You spoke of partnerships, of shared values, of integrity." A bitter, mirthless smile touched her lips. "This," she said, gesturing to the pathetic scene on the stage, "is your integrity? This is the character of the man I am supposed to go into business with." Total silence. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted. It had been completely inverted. The mockers had become the mocked, their smug smiles vanishing, replaced by expressions of fear and dawning horror. Isabella took a step closer to the stage, her voice softening slightly as she finally addressed Liam directly, loud enough for all to hear. "2 nights ago, in a storm, I was a stranger sitting on a bench, lost in my own grief. I had lost faith in the decency of the world. And then a man who had almost nothing performed an act of selfless kindness. He gave me his only umbrella, his only protection from the rain, and asked for nothing in return. He didn't know who I was. He saw only a person in need." She paused, letting her words sink in, letting the entire room understand the origin of her connection to the man they were all mocking. "That man," she declared, her voice ringing with undeniable conviction, "has more honor, more integrity, and more human decency in his little finger than the entire Vance family has in its bloodline. That man is Liam Ashton." She then turned her fiery gaze back to Amelia. "You were going to marry him, and you discarded him for this performance. You thought he was worthless. You are the one who is worthless. You are a hollow, brittle shell of a person, and you are not fit to stand in his shadow." Amelia's face, once a mask of smug cruelty, had crumpled into a shattered portrait of disbelief and public ruin. The salvation was not yet complete. Isabella raised her hand, and Marcus stepped forward, handing her a crisp document from his briefcase. She held it up for Charles Vance to see. "This was the preliminary contract for the Reyes-Vance merger," she announced, her voice like the snap of a whip. "A deal that would have saved your failing company. A deal worth billions." Then, slowly and deliberately, she ripped the contract in half, and then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the polished marble floor like dead leaves. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled guests. The Vances were ruined, publicly and financially, in a single cathartic act. "We are done here," Isabella stated. She then turned, walked up the 2 steps onto the platform, and stood directly in front of Liam. The entire world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of quiet intensity. She reached out and gently touched his arm, the first physical contact between them. The warmth of her hand seemed to spread through his entire body, chasing away the biting cold of his despair. "Liam Ashton," she said, her voice now tender, raw with an emotion that stunned everyone present. "Will you leave this place with me?" He stared at her, his heart thudding wildly in his chest, his mind unable to fully process the seismic shift that had just occurred. He saw the woman from the bus stop, her amber eyes now glistening not with grief, but with an unwavering strength and a profound, unspoken promise of safety. Hope, a feeling he thought he had lost forever, surged through him. He gave a single, shaky nod. "Yes," he whispered, his voice cracking, and together, they turned their backs on the wreckage of the Vance family and walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a scene of shattered pride and a silent, stunned crowd. He was saved. The journey to her home was a blur. Liam sat in the impossibly sleek, silent interior of Isabella's car, the city lights sliding past the tinted windows like scattered jewels. He was still trembling, the adrenaline of the rescue slowly giving way to a profound sense of disbelief. He kept glancing at the woman beside him, the powerful CEO who had just dismantled his tormentors with a few calm words, and tried to reconcile her with the fragile, grieving stranger he had met at the bus stop. They were two sides of the same incredible person. They arrived at her residence, a stately, modern mansion that was more glass and light than stone, nestled in the hills overlooking the city. Inside, a soft hush enveloped them. The air was warm, and a gentle fire was crackling in a large, minimalist fireplace, casting a golden glow across the room. It was the complete opposite of the Vance's cold, ornate mausoleum. Felt like a sanctuary. Isabella led him to a pair of soft, comfortable chairs near the fire. She moved with a quiet grace, her commanding presence softened now into something more gentle and approachable. She left for a moment and returned with 2 steaming mugs of tea, placing one in his still shaking hands. The warmth of the ceramic was grounding. They sat in a comfortable silence for a long time, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant, soft drumming of the rain, which had returned. It was no longer a threatening sound, but a soothing one. Finally, Liam found his voice, a quiet, raw thing. "Why?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for an answer that made sense. "Why would you do all of that, for me?" Isabella looked into the flames, a sad, tender smile on her lips. "Because you did something for me first," she replied softly. "You reminded me that goodness exists. You did that at a time when I needed it most, and so, in the quiet, safe, dimly lit space, the confessions began." She spoke first, her voice steady but laced with a deep, unhealed pain. She told him about her husband, David, and her son, Leo. She spoke of the life they had shared, a life filled with simple joys and profound love, and of the brutal accident that had stolen them from her 5 years ago. She described the hollow years that followed, the all-consuming grief that had turned her heart to stone, leaving her cynical and alone in a world that had lost all its color. As she spoke, Liam listened with unwavering attention, his own pain momentarily forgotten. He saw the immense tragedy she carried behind her powerful facade. He was seeing the real woman, stripped of her corporate armor. He saw her soul. When she finished, her story hanging in the quiet air between them, there were tears glistening in her eyes. Liam didn't offer empty platitudes or clumsy words of comfort. Instead, he simply reached out and placed his hand gently over hers, a simple, sincere gesture of shared humanity. The contact was electric, a current of unspoken understanding passing between them. He then began to share his own story. He spoke of his parents, lost when he was just a teenager, leaving him to care for his chronically ill sister. He described the relentless struggle, the endless jobs, the constant fear of not having enough for Grace's medicine, the quiet desperation that had led him into the Vance's gilded cage. He confessed the depth of his humiliation, not just from the mock wedding, but from every condescending glance and cruel word he had endured for his sister's sake. He laid his own worn, fragile soul bare. Isabella listened, her expression full of a deep, cathartic empathy. She saw the immense inner strength it took for him to endure so much with such quiet dignity. They were two wounded people, from two vastly different worlds, who had found in each other a mirror for their own pain and a balm for their own loneliness. A bond was forged in that firelit room, a profound connection built not on wealth or status, but on shared grief and mutual respect. The grand rescue in the ballroom had saved his life, but this quiet, tender moment of shared vulnerability was saving his soul. 1 year later, the golden afternoon sunlight streamed through the large windows of a charming, comfortable house, illuminating the soft motes of dust dancing in the air. The scent of baking bread and fresh flowers filled the warm kitchen. Liam, his face no longer gaunt but filled with a quiet, happy confidence, was laughing as he helped a vibrant, healthy-looking Grace frost a birthday cake. Her laughter, once a painful, wheezing sound, was now clear and joyous, echoing through the home. The ghosts of their past, the damp apartment, the medical bills, the constant fear, had vanished, replaced by an undeniable sense of peace and security. Isabella entered the kitchen, a soft, genuine smile on her face, a look of pure contentment that her board of directors would never have recognized. She was no longer dressed in commanding power suits, but in a simple, comfortable sweater. She walked over to Liam and wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. He turned his head and kissed her, a gesture so full of gentle, everyday love that it felt more profound than any grand declaration. Theirs was a quiet love, built on a foundation of shared healing and deep, mutual adoration. They had found in each other not just a partner, but a home for their once-weary souls. The world outside, with its corporations and socialites, still turned, but inside these walls, they had created their own small, perfect universe, a testament to the fact that the purest acts of kindness can bloom in the most unexpected of places, and that sometimes a simple, offered umbrella can be the beginning of a love that saves you from the storm. This story, at its core, is a fable about the unseen power that resides in a single, selfless act. It serves as a profound reminder that the value of a person is not measured by their wealth or their station, but by the quiet integrity of their character. Liam, in his moment of deepest despair, possessed a richness the Fiancée could never comprehend. Isabella, surrounded by unimaginable wealth, was emotionally bankrupt until a simple act of kindness from a stranger replenished her soul. Their journey illustrates a universal truth. True strength is found in compassion, and the greatest fortunes are those of the heart. It's a testament to the idea that when we offer a piece of ourselves to help another, without any expectation of reward, we may unknowingly be setting in motion a miracle that will not only save them, but will ultimately save us as well. If this story touched your heart and reaffirmed your faith in the quiet power of kindness, please let it be more than just a passing moment of inspiration. Let it be a reminder of the impact you can have on the world around you. We all encounter people who are silently weathering their own private storms. A small gesture, an unsolicited act of compassion, a metaphorical umbrella offered in a downpour, can be the very thing that reawakens a weary heart and changes a life forever. You may never know the full extent of the ripple effect your goodness creates, but you can be certain that it matters more than you can possibly imagine. We pour our hearts into creating these soul-stirring narratives for you. To help us continue sharing inspiring and heartwarming stories like this one, please show your support. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. Your engagement allows us to keep crafting tales that celebrate love, resilience, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. We'll see you in the next one.